So it's Krister Vasshus.
Vasshus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Language has always been a weak point for me, trying to learn other languages. And today we're going to talk about language because within kind of the last month, a very exciting discovery that was found in the fall, if I'm correct, and just got released to the world, that the now oldest known runestone has been found. And so where did we find this? How did we find this?
Well, where it's in the southern parts of Norway, so not that far away from Oslo. It's what we in Norway call the East Country. So it's on a sort of tiny peninsula in a lake, not far from Oslo.
Okay.
And it's called, to Norwegians, they would probably know the city of Hønefoss. Not a wild big city, but it's a place where the map agency has their headquarters in it. So yeah, and it's, when did they find it and how did they find it? Well, the reason why they found it was because there's going to be a new rail line, and so before the rail line is going to be built, the archaeologists are sent out there to document whatever they can, and in this particular place there are 3 grave mounds. So they wanted to excavate these 3 grave mounds, and so they did. And when they were done with that, they could see that there's also what we call a flat grave. That's what we call it in Norwegian. I'm not sure if it's an English term for it, but the point is, a flat grave has no markings above the ground, so there's no way of knowing that there is a grave there. And in this flat grave, they also decided to dig into it, and they found the cremation grave, or the cremation remains of this young adult person, and they found 2 stones, and one of them was it seems to have been a part of the burial. So when they deposited the skeletal remains, or the remains of the cremation, they also put the grave, I was about to say the gravestone, but the runestone on top of it. So it seems to be a part of the burial. So that's how they found it.
So is this, do we know what this runestone says? What it?
The thing is, it says more than one thing. When they first found it, all they saw was this sort of flat little slab of stone. And in the lights of the nature at that point, sort of an autumn, windy, rainy situation without particularly good lights, they didn't see anything. So they brought this stone back with them into the National Museum, and under the artificial lights, they could see that there were some sorts of incisions on them. They took a photo of it, sent it to the runologist at the Cultural History Museum in Oslo, Krister Silmer, and asked, "Is this something?" And it is something. So what seems to be the main inscription, and I'm saying main here because there are several inscriptions, and it's a bit difficult to tell exactly how many individual inscriptions there are. There's the front side, but even on the top side, there's an inscription.
Okay, so all right, so the only picture I've seen of it has just been one inscription on one side. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying that all over this stone, there's the total of 7 different inscriptions on it.
But it's difficult to make out exactly how many, but at least 3.
Okay.
Possibly more.
Okay, so why? So please explain why it's made this so difficult to tell how many inscriptions there are.
Possibly because it was never intended to be viewed. So I think a parallel could be, well, let's. The thing is that they probably just deposited it on the grave, dug it in, and it was never meant to be seen by anyone. That's one option. Another option is that seems like it's been made by more than one person. Some of the incisions are deeper and more clear. And you've probably seen the one that is the clearest, which says Idi Berog, or possibly Idi Beron, which we have said in the media that it's quite possibly a name or a family name. There are several possible interpretations of this sequence. So it's what we've been saying in the media is just 2 of those, and you know it's all work in progress. So when we publish the peer-reviewed article, it'll have all the possibilities in there and so on. But so the main inscription, Idi Berog, possibly the name of the person who's buried there. That's, you know, normally we refrain ourselves from saying this must be the person named in this particular source and so on. But you know, there's such a clear link between the stone and the grave, so it's a bit difficult not to at least have that thought in your head when you're dealing with this.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the inscriptions. The other inscription on the top side, or the side of the stone, it's a bit longer, but it's much more difficult to interpret because there are more consonants than vowels, and the distribution of consonants doesn't make immediate. Well, it's not a very obvious linguistic content of the inscription. But it is also interesting to see that the very clear incisions are. It looks like there's someone there who's trying to imitate some of the signs with a bit of a less clear cut, maybe even put with a needle or a knife that's very, very thin or something of the sort. So the shape of the rune, well, not the shape, but the means of how they were cut into the stone seems to be different, and seems to be more than one person, or at least in more than one situation. The same person might have done all of it, but changed tools in a way.
Okay. Are you guys able to tell if there is any particular reasoning as to why they might have switched tools? Does it give you any more information as to how it was carved?
We hope to be able to answer this after the proper scanning and photos of them. Justin Kimball is doing his 3D scans of it later on with MRI scanning and various types of scanning. So we hope to be able to determine, you know, the shallowness and even the angle of the tool that has been used and so on. We can't say for now that we'll be able to tell, but we hope to be able to say something about this. But when it comes to why let's hypothesize that there's one carver. Why has he or she changed tools. Well, that's impossible for us to answer just from this stone. We would need comparative evidence from other stones, other types of sources to be able to say that.
Okay. Has this been found on any other runic inscriptions before? People switching tools and...
It's a good question. I can't think of any obvious candidates at the moment. It would be reasonable to assume that there might be, but you're talking to the linguist and not the runologist of the project. So Krister Silmer would probably be able to tell you more about this. So my focus has mostly been the language here, although I'm thrilled about the runes, of course, but my expertise here is the language. There's no doubt about this being Elder Futhark.
Okay. Does this give us new information about the Elder Futhark system?
Yes, it does. First of all, it's the oldest runestone, and the general dating from 1 AD to 250 AD. That's fairly, this time span is fairly long, and the oldest datable runic inscription we had from advance was from about 160, 170, the Harja comb from Vimose. So it's not necessarily the oldest runic inscription, and it belongs to the same category. It's the Elder Futhark, and the runes, with the exception of the B rune and the S rune, look exactly the same as elsewhere.
Okay. Just quickly, why is the B rune and the S? What's different with those two? In the Elder Futhark, normally you would see the B rune as just, you know, the ordinary Latin script B, just in the, you know, typical zigzag runic shape. But in this inscription, instead of the 2 bowls, the B rune has 4 bowls. So it sort of looks like 2 B runes stacked on top of each other. And it's a similar thing with the S runes. It's got, you know, the same amount of joints as the B rune. Okay.
Yeah. And that's very interesting. I mean, this is I'm again moving into the runology thing here, with the, you know, origin of runes and how they've been played with and how it's developed into the writing system of the Germanic peoples. This is not my expertise, but it's super interesting. And the fact also that it looked like there's more than one person writing on this slab of stone. It indicates some kind of playfulness that we haven't seen before in runic inscriptions. So that in itself is super interesting. But our problem is, of course, it's the inscriptions of this period is so rare. I mean, we have this example of this rune and this playfulness. So we need more. Send out the archaeologists everywhere. Find the flat graves, which are impossible to see because they have no markings above soil level. So yeah, it's we have potentially a lot of runic inscription in the soil that we might never ever find.
So we're probably gonna have to go get some LiDAR scans.
That would be a very good suggestion.
Yeah.
LiDAR is absolutely one of the best inventions we have in modern archaeology. It's brilliant, and it can really move us forward. We don't have to destroy everything by digging it. We can just figure out where the interesting stuff is and make, surgical precision archaeology.
But has this altered any current theories we have on the development and language in this region? Has
not when it comes to language. There is little evidence at all. Well, actually, by looking at this runestone, and mind you, there are 2 runestones. We haven't talked about the other one. That is also an inscription that seems to follow the pattern we see in other Elder Futhark inscriptions. The ek something something made the runes. And the grammar and the way things seem to be represented with runes compared to sounds, expected sounds of the Proto-Norse language, it looks like it's Proto-Norse, so the predecessor of Old Norse. So we can't say that it's a new discovery of a new language. What's it called? Stage of language. So it's not the predecessor of Proto-Norse in a way. It's not Proto-Germanic, in example. But the runes themselves, I think that's something a lot of people are going to debate in the coming years on the basis of this stone. The shape of the runes, the origins, does it alter any hypotheses and theories about the origins of runes? And those questions are going to be vividly debated in the coming years, I expect.
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously now it's kind of opened that Pandora's box for debate, because one of the leading theories was it was from Roman interaction.
Yep.
That's how we got the Elder Futhark system. That came from Latin. Yep. Now we have something older than that, and that goes way even further up north. So you said that there was the second runestone.
Yep.
And so what do we have right now on that one?
Well, it's a stone that has been broken to pieces, but we can puzzle it together, and we also have some difficulties reading this stone, but it's very clear that the first word starts with ek, meaning I. Mm-hmm. And then the runes become a bit difficult to read, but it's very clearly ends with the rune, the word for the rune. I, someone or something, probably the verb fajido, which means I carved or I painted, actually, it means the rune. So it's a typical formula you find in example, the Einang stone, which says ek godagastir. Well, so yeah, it says someone painted the rune, and it follows a pattern that we can see already, and now it's possible that because of the dating we now have of this new stone, that the other rune stones we've just assumed are from the 4th century, say 4th. Typically, they're dated to the 4th or maybe 5th century. Some of those might be older, because when it comes to stones, you can't really date them. Reason why we can date our stone, the one we're talking about now, the Svingerud stone, is because it's in an undisturbed context. And generally, if an inscription is carved in the wall of a cliff, you have no means of dating that. It's made of rock. You can't date it. If it would be made of wood, you could carbon date it. You could do the dendrochronology on it. But when it comes to stone, we rely on, the archaeological context. And this is, when it comes to those early, Elder Futhark runestones, this is the only really good dating we have. So what that means is more or less that some of the other stones might be a bit older. When it comes to the theory of a development from Latin, that's not a problem at all, because we're still in the first or second century, which is, the Germanic peoples have been in contact with Romans for centuries already. Some of them have been schooled in the Roman Empire. Arminius, an example, before the war between, you've probably seen the Netflix series the Barbarian. Yeah, so that took place before this inscription was made, for sure.
Is there a difference in how you guys read? Like, is there a different, like, by the age, is it how you read it? Does it change, like left to right, right to left?
Well, when it comes to reading right to left and left to right, that's more or less up to the carver at this point. So the Elder Futhark is, now we're gonna have to date it possibly a bit earlier, but possibly from year 1 to the transition period, which is 600s, 700s.
Wait, 600, 700 BC?
No.
Oh,
80. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's say that the Elder Runic Futhark might start in year 1. Up until now, we've said that it's from year 160, 170, which is still probably going to be what most people will date it, because the secure dating of the Mosecom is it's more secure. It's made from it should be carbon dating of the horn itself, or the antler rather. So yeah, to 160 up until the transition period in the 7th century approximately, where the runes start to act a bit weird. And they probably start to act a bit weird because about 500, the language in Scandinavia started to change dramatically. The reasons for the changes in Latin, the language might be, it's interesting in itself, and being a linguist, I can talk about this for hours, but let's just
please feel free to go on.
Now let's just stay to this to the topic here, and just say that the language starts to change in such a dramatic way that some of the runes doesn't really represent the name of the runes very well. And so the rune for, the A rune, in example, it's called Ansur, which is the word of the Aesir, the gods of the tribe of Odin. And when you get to the Old Norse era, that would be pronounced Os. So from Ansur to Os, that's not an A sound, that's an O sound. And we have this in some of the other runes as well, that it doesn't represent, the word for the rune doesn't represent the sound it's supposed to supposed to be the sound for, or the letter for. So that makes the whole system of the Futhark change a bit. And so it goes from, well, in Scandinavia, it goes from being 24 sign system in the Iron Age to the Viking Age system of 16 runes. Whereas in the Anglo-Saxon area, actually the Futhark expands, and they get more letters for each of their sounds in the language. So that's a short summary of the development of the Futhark in the earliest stage. Later on, you get masses of different variations in Scandinavia as well.
Okay. And was that a result because of an increase in literacy, or?
Absolutely. Well, in to some degree, yes.
Okay.
When it comes to the transition period, changes in the transition period, I'm not sure you can say that it certainly has something to do with the overall literacy. That's very difficult to determine, actually.
Okay. So would that mean that there was a huge cultural shift, like people didn't view runes the same way anymore?
Might be. There certainly were cultural shifts in the period we would call the syncope era in Scandinavian, which is the years between about 500 to 700. A lot of things happened to society at that point. We have the migration era, so there was a lot of movement, and we also have well, ecological catastrophes when it comes to some kind of weather phenomenon. We have this issue of the crisis of 536, 537, when the weather really has a dramatic drop. There are several volcanic eruptions. I think there's also been talk about some sort of meteorite strike, but it's I'm not sure if that's fully settled. But there were several volcanic eruptions that caused the northern hemisphere to be severely, well, cooled, and Scandinavia in particular. And we have, well, it must have had some kind of implications to people who were reliant on growing food from marginal areas. I mean, Scandinavia is not the best area to grow grains and cereals. So I am very for the idea that something dramatic happened to society in Scandinavia around the first part of 500. And we can also see in the archaeological record that we have some indications that settlement, the way people settled their farms, seems to shift from more a moving around every now and then up until about 600, where they actually settled and are still settled to this day. So farms, the historical positioning of farms in, well, at least in Denmark and large parts of Norway are, well, they were settled there at around 600. So in the aftermath, possibly after this area of catastrophe, and where we can assume a lot of people have lost their lives, and the survivors would really make an effort to respawn and rebuild society, have loads of kids. And you know the thing about kids, they don't speak correctly, do they?
No.
So if there are a lot of kids with a very low amount of grown-ups to correct their speech, things are gonna go south. And you know, we don't really have the evidence to say that this is what happened, but it's an you can call it a hypothesis, I suppose. Not even sure it's a theory, but I think I like this hypothesis a lot. So I'm a huge fan.
Okay, so the generations following, there was a huge shift because these are kids. This is a new generation. There's more of them than their parents, and they're going to have a whole different perspective on the runes.
It's important not to exaggerate it either, because runic literacy prevails and the language continues. Yeah, it has a lot of changes to it, but the material culture and the culture itself, it survives. And when even something like runic literacy survives, and provided we linger on to the assumption that only the elite was able to properly use the runes, then the catastrophe cannot have been so bad that it completely eradicated the face of the earth, so to speak. Enough people who had the knowledge beforehand survived and were able to bring it onto their to continue the traditions of the oral traditions, the mythology, the religion, all of that. It continues. So it's not to say that we have a sudden snap and then everything changes. It's a transition, and it happens over a couple of 100 years, which is fast. But yeah, it's I think I would like to underscore that it's not. Let's not exaggerate the whole thing, but yeah, I'm sort of speaking against myself in a way, but
yeah. So the span, that wider span means more people it might have been for a broader population, not just the elite now, or it continued just.
I think we can't in the early Viking Age, we can't really say that it's a common thing to write runes. I would like to say that we have indications that women write runes already in the 200s. There are several inscriptions that bear the grammatical gender of female. So like personal names like Letro and Lamo, they end with the O sound, which is grammatically female, unless of course they were from the West Germanic area. Then they could possibly be male names. But then again, why would all these West Germanic people be in Scandinavia? What were they doing here? Why were they carving runes?
Yeah, so less likely that was even a case, even a possibility.
It is possible that these names on some of the jewelry, an example, were male names, but I think it's more likely that they were actually the names of the carver or owner of the jewelry. The things we find, they're weapons, they're the jewelry. That's the stuff used by the elite. So we might have a circular argument, train of thoughts when it comes to why we assume that the elite were using it. I'm not saying that it wasn't the elite, because I prefer that idea based on the evidence we have, because we don't have all the sticks where they write nasty little things and jokes and so on. But it would make sense that would exist. I mean, why did the Germanic people even develop a writing system? when we look at other cultures, why did they do that? Well, it was to write notes to each other, write who owes what to whom, and so on. And that could be a reasonable reason why to make a system for writing in the Germanic area as well. Not when it comes to a writing system in its own right. I mean, in the same way of the runic alphabet in any case. I mean, we have plenty of petroglyphs, carvings in the rock, rock art of various sorts. But no one's been able to decipher, to my knowledge anyways, to decipher it as a system of writing, be it in code or hieroglyph like or any of the sort. So no.
All right. So I think that very well could wrap it up. I mean, is there anything else you'd like to share with people or talk about in terms of these stones and this discovery?
Oh, I could talk for a long time about that, but
yeah, we love hearing it. It's what this channel is all about.
Yeah. I think this stone is going to be there's so many things about this stone which is so cool. I mean, just the fact that it's been found the way it's been found, it even opens the possibility that we have a whole way of making and depositing rune stones that we've never been aware about. If this represents a way that people actually did carve runic inscriptions in the early period, it could potentially mean we have so many stones that we've overlooked in graves that we've already dug in, and in I mean, in, let's say, the archaeological excavations of the 1800s and early 19th or early 20th century, it might have been overlooked. Stones that just looked like a stone. Well, not interesting. We're looking for artifacts, gold, and so on. So we're keeping on digging. That's one. Another issue is the whole creation of the tradition of runestones. I mean, you've already touched upon it, that it's north. This find is northernly, and when you look at the runic inscriptions in the Elder Futhark, when it comes to runic stones, where are they? Well, they're in Norway, all of them, almost all of them. We have about, what is it, 30 stones in the Elder Futhark. When you compare the amount of runic stones altogether, Sweden wins by a long shot. But when you look at the older Futhark, most of them are in Norway, of the rune stones. We still have artifacts with Elder Futhark inscriptions, but the stones are in Norway. And I think this hasn't been properly addressed. I would like to see some research on that. Why does the tradition of raising runestones start in Norway? I don't think the runic system was invented in Norway. I don't think that's like, well, it's not impossible, but we don't have the evidence to say that it was or wasn't. It would make more sense that somewhere closer to Rome would make it. But I mean, people could get to Rome from Norway as well, so it's, you can't rule it completely out. But there are many interesting questions to be raised from this runestone, and a lot of them are going to be very nerdy and probably best talked about by someone with more detailed knowledge about runology than myself, being a linguist. Well, we briefly touched upon that there are more than one, but yeah, so one of the inscriptions is probably the name of the person, or I'm saying probably, possibly a name is probably what I should say. And then there are some other signs that could be runes, because they look a bit like runes, but they could also be rune-like symbols made, in example, by someone who was imitating runes. And there are also just carvings, long marks, incisions all over the stones, some of them diagonal from one upper corner to the other corner. So that there are many different types of incisions, making it very difficult to make out which incisions are intended as runes, and do they make sense as linguistic sequences. And we have, well, it's work in progress, and we have certainly this sequence that looks like a personal name, particularly if you assume that one of the runes might have been left out. So if it would be Idi Berung, it would be a name, a family name in the vocative case. So it would be sort of like if you address someone saying, "Hey, Garrett," that would be the vocative case. So that would equal this inscription then, possibly. But then again, why would you say, "Hey, someone who's there buried, dead"? I'm not completely convinced that it would make linguistically sense in this context. But as I said, there are several possibilities, and because the runes are difficult to read, it's difficult to find the right, to find the meaning that the carver intended. I'm not at all in doubt that all of the inscriptions have an intended meaning. And I'm not talking about magic, rune magic here. That's not what I mean. I mean the intention of there's some sort of intention with these inscriptions. And we have yet to figure that out properly, or at least to publish our thoughts about it properly. But that's going to happen. We will have articles ready in not too long.
Has there been anything like that anywhere else?
Not the kind of lines we see on the Svingerudstone, but we do have other artistic expressions on, or a good example would be the Egja stone from Sogn in Norway, which is, well, some people would consider it as a transition stone. It's probably just an early example of Old Norse. Well, it's the language is at least very close to Old Norse language. So that's there's a horse on that stone, which is interesting because, I mean, that's also an example of a stone faced downwards, so quite possibly not intended to be seen. And there are so many arts, types of arts, jewelry with runic inscriptions, and that sort of has to be brought into it. And when it comes to, well, the Germanic peoples seemed to love the double meaning of things. So just look at the animal style. What is the head of the person? What is the mouth? And what is the arms? And what is supposed to be the animal next to it? And it's sort of a mishmash between things. And when you look at the personal names, the names of the persons also very often consist of two words put together, and typically animals are part of it. So does this mean that the Germanic peoples preferred to attribute themselves some sort of animals as an ideal, sort of could be also connected to war, to religion, and those are the main themes when it comes to personal names in Germanic. I think all of Germanic speaking world, up until the Christianing of the continental Germanic peoples, certainly then they started getting more shorter names, and also names of other origins, which makes sense. I mean, you import names of people you like from the cultures you're in contact with. People do that today as well.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.